Welcome to the show. I have Nigel Travis, who is former CEO and chair of Dunkin brands, former CEO of Papa John's, former COO of Blockbuster, and currently co-owner and chair of Leyton Orient Football Club in London, England. And by the way, Nigel actually also serves on 4 different boards, including Abercrombie & Fitch and Advanced Auto Parts. For today's episode, we are deep diving into his book, The Challenge Culture, why the most successful organizations run on pushback. So if you're an employee who would like to challenge your boss's idea, or you're an employee who would like to be that go-to employee that your boss comes to for big ideas, you want to make sure to stick around for this episode.
Well, the challenge culture is fairly simple. It basically is about a culture. I always say when I do speeches that what's important is not to have the challenge culture, but to have a culture that people believe in. But the challenge culture is one where you effectively, in a very polite and civil way, attack issues and people can be challenged in the way they do it. Don't attack them. You start asking questions, open questions like, we do it this way. I've noted our competitor does it that way. Is there anything we should learn from it? So you start building the dialogue and you go in slowly. And the way not to do it is to challenge up front. So yes. To get back to your original question, go in, ask some questions, see how far you go. But I think what you can really do is build up your credibility by demonstrating how the challenge culture works within your own group. Well, I think my favorite challenge question is, can we do this better? Obviously, it is great to have an enjoyable culture at the same time. And I truly think the challenge culture is an enjoyable culture, having operated in it. By the way, I'm not saying it's perfect, because nothing's perfect in the world. And that's why we need to constantly improve. I went to Papa John's and I started in the early part of 2005. And in March, we had a convention. But the way to win in a franchise organization is get the franchisees on your side. So I sat there, new CEO, and we had an existing CEO and founder, John Schneider. John and I had a good relationship when I got there, and I listened, I met the franchisees, and I went back to my room that night and I heard the news that Dominos were going to sponsor The Apprentice featuring Donald Trump. So I went down, I talked to John Schneider, I said, I've got this great idea. I think we should attack The Apprentice by buying media locally, but on a national basis. So John thought it was a brilliant idea, but the key thing I did, I said to the franchisees, got this idea, do you think this is a good idea? And they stood up, they got enthusiastic, they got all excited. So I got the franchisees behind it right up front. So I then went out and worked with our advertising agency, the Z Group, Zimmerman Advertising, who remain good friends of mine. And we put an ad together in less than a week. And there's this picture of John Schneider in a big chair, turning around and saying to The Apprentice, "You're fired." So it was effectively taking what Donald Trump was doing it and turning it back on himself. And then we finished up with the meatball pizza, which was our new product. So it's amazing. That became legendary in marketing circles. And I think the lessons were, you have to get people behind you. And at the same time, there is a myth that you can't do things quickly. Yes. We did it. We bought all the media nationally in 2 weeks. You do work with lots of companies. How many companies have never really thought about their culture? Is that true?
Yeah, because culture a lot of times is invisible to them. It seems soft and abstract. Let's talk about the bottom line. You got to talk about the bottom line, of course. But man, if you can, what is this invisible net that's holding our organization together? And what if we can be really intentional about creating it?
And I often use the word 360-degree challenge because I'm so ingrained with it now. If I write something, I always take it to my wife and ask, well, what do you think of this?
Which was your approach with your book idea? as I recall. And she started challenging you immediately, right? On why you would write a book in the first place. It seems like you're opening Pandora's box. And in fact, I'm expecting when people listen to this part of the podcast, at least 50% of the listeners are probably sweating because they're like, here we have Nigel writing a book on challenge culture saying my employees should be challenging me and I should create that environment. Isn't that like opening Pandora's box?
I think it is, and I think it's good. Blockbuster was a great experience, and Blockbuster did a lot of things right. Blockbuster was a real innovator. I mean, when I got there, I had nothing to do with this, but when I got there, they were testing machines in stores, copying music, games, and video. And you could bang in a video, and out the other end came a copy of the video. Think how magical that is. But the real lesson that everyone talks about is we saw Netflix on the horizon. We kind of ignored them. They came in, offered to sell the company to us for a very low price, 50 million. We rejected it. And I'll ask your listeners to go on and look at Netflix current value is several billion. But the point is, you've always got to be looking for the disruptor. You've always got to be looking for the competitor around the corner. And I don't think people think actively about what's coming around the corner.
What's your daily or periodic process for self-reflection?
I work out, and when I do running, I listen to podcasts, and the podcasts help me think about what I've done right, what I've done wrong. I've also been fortunate that writing a book means you have to reflect.
Yes.
I think the challenge culture means you have to reflect because people challenge what you're doing. And I've had some really strong personalities in my life who challenged me.
I've been coaching my daughter's soccer team for some time, and I understand that you are also passionate about coaching soccer/football. Or how can the challenge culture show up on the kids' soccer field? And how can I use that with my team?
Yeah, I've coached actually, it's going to sound dreadful, for 51 years. And I'm coaching my 13-year-old daughter's team. I've coached this team essentially for about 5 years. They're great. One of the things I've always done with them is I get them to use your words, Ben, to reflect. So one of the first things I will say at halftime is, okay, guys, how did we do? And the power of silence. I don't say anything. How did we do? Silence. Yeah, I don't think we played very well. So the reason for doing it, it makes them think about the lessons that we've talked about. So all these are lessons that we've gone through, but you get them to say it rather than you. And again, it requires you to be very good at how you ask them questions. It's no different from what I do at work. It's making them do the mental thinking about it, which gets the ideas ingrained.
And as a leader, if you're going to ask a challenge question, you've got to be prepared to be in silence and let them formulate a response, which I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with. How do you deal with silence?
Well, I think you bring a really good point up, and it's interesting. You know, you have to sometimes put out a statement, then a silence, and silence is okay. You don't have to fill every spot. When I first came to the States, I did a study within a few months of the cost of turnover, to your point, and we found we had turnover of, I think it was 240%. And we then did a calculation of the cost of turnover. Remember, this is in '89, so a long time ago. And the cost was 42 million a year. And this was just in corporate stores. And the corporate stores were about 20% of the system. So people don't think about the cost of turnover, the cost of recruiting people, the cost of training them, the cost of replacing them, and then the lost knowledge.
Completely agree with that.
And I think it's kind of, I'm really pleased you raised it because I think it's a lost science. I mean, it's very important when you're in companies like Dunkin and Papa John's, where turnover in those industries tends to be high. But what is interesting, people say, well, you're not going to change it. When I was at Dunkin, we had a conference for international, and one of our Baskin-Robbins franchisees in Southeast Asian country it was actually in Now, everyone else in the meeting didn't believe it, so we made them present. And they did all the things which I'm sure your listeners would think are good things. They paid people appropriately. They had feedback loops. They tackled issues. They did all the right things, and they got the turnover down to 0. Wow. I'm not saying you can do that in big organizations. It proves you can really make a difference. So.
Thanks for checking out my interview with Nigel Travis. Now, if you really like to get promoted, get productive, and get the corner office, make sure you stick around for the next video.